What if Xanatos never fell to the dark side?
Ah, Padawan. I heard your shuttle arriving.
Sorry, guess I can't get my head out of the past. Every good deed helps make up for the past. No point in standing around.
So eager. You and your new master should get along nicely.
As long as you don't mind having me around.
Trust in your initial training. We haven't seen such power in decades.
With respect, I'd rather be training than talking.
What would happen if the second Padawan to Qui-Gon Jinn never went down the dark path? What if he maintained his position in the Jedi Order? And what now? Having first met Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn upon the very planet of his birth, the decision to train Xanatos was forever laced with regret, burdened by three sources: the Master, the Padawan, and the parent. Having only one to call his, since the mother is only mentioned in one single passing, the father, Cryan, was hesitant. The potential student, Xanatos, was aloft and far gone, young enough to be trained, but old enough to already hold attachment towards family. And the teacher himself knew then and there that he shouldn't train the boy. Yet still, such anxious denial only went so far when Cryan finally relented on that which he couldn't provide. The richest man on his planet, yes, but there were such things that money couldn't buy, like the power taught by Jedi. And while no direct suggestion is ever made, implications from his own advance to later turn his son would suggest one thing. Cryan deliberately allowed Xanatos to train with the Jedi in the planned belief that someday his son, now strong, would return, something that obviously occurred in George's timeline. However, in my opinion, even before this final test, Xanatos had already displayed a whole host of issues and problems. Much like Skywalker years down the line, one thing that haunted them both was attachment towards family, yes, but in regard to the former host, he also felt attached towards his wealth, born knowing almost nothing but privilege. In fact, while Anakin was born a slave, Xanatos was born an aristocrat, ordained solely by his father's worth. More than just money or blood, he was also hewn and lynched by his pride and intellect, somewhat comparable to Severin's Tan. Quick-witted of mind and purpose, sharp and always aware of his surroundings and his nearest path out. All of these things were openly seen and spotted by Master Jin, but he refused to act on them, too confident from the successful training of Femor. Now, I will not derail this video into a conversation about his first Padawan, but I must point out that Femor just completely disappears. The idea of a what if Qui-Gon Jinn's first Padawan never vanished could, by itself, be its own separate story, with Femor, a Jedi Knight, while sparring during the early panels of Dark Side 1. Set 21 years before Episode 1, and with no implication of his death afterwards, the question must be asked, where did he go? The appearance, performance, and position of Femor all justify him getting his own video, whenever that day will be. Pressing on from this, the greatest trial for Xanatos, again, much like Anakin Skywalker, was his return to his home planet, bound by memories from the past, worried about losing the life and master he held now, and above all, afraid. With this fear becoming the first step towards his eventual fall, it was only the verbal manipulation and eventual death of his father that swayed him, especially since after the ship he rode first crashed and he found himself with a blaster to his face, it was his father, Cryon, who saved him, not his master, who had already previously pleaded for him to return inside their ship. And beyond that, the emotional swing from losing his sister too was enough to finally turn him. Holding all of this close to our train of thought, it is impossible to prevent the fall of Xanatos without fully addressing these events. Because of this, our first major change in this storyline will occur here. Glossing over the speech of Orakan Tamarik and the sheer implications that she herself was already openly questioning the ship's return over 20 years before Qui-Gon's death, the focus would remain on Xanatos and what would be, in our timeline, regret. And this is because here, in our timeline, after gloating in front of Femor, after mocking the poor family his friend descended from, let's say their conversation went on for just a few more seconds. Let's say that Xanatos was forced to answer his master's question. Would he have willingly sacrificed his own victory in the sparring match for his partner to win? And his answer was no. Skipping back to the previously mentioned panel, this answer and the disappointing look he received upon giving it would both echo aloud inside his mind, reinforced by trauma, as both the imagery and name of his home planet were presented and spoken aloud. While Xanatos would speak out, and he would question the decision of the council before leaving in shame, with council members Mikagiet and Yoda both questioning his worth as a Jedi, the difference in our timeline is the reasoning for this doubt. In George's timeline, Xanatos mistakes this assignment to return upon Telos 4 as the Jedi formally abandoning him. He thought that both the Council and Master Jin had turned their backs on him. He thought that he was a failure. Waving goodbye to Master Tall and her newly attained temporary Padawan, Jin and Xanatos would descend the stairs in the same way, with the latter leaping from the side before plummeting a vast distance, just as he originally did. What would be different is the conversation they shared and the questions that this student asked his master. Tying back to the singular answer he gave earlier in this story in regard to if he would sacrifice himself to save another, let's say that now the student would ask his master this very same premise, and the reassuring speed at which Qui-Gon answered was akin to lightning. Of course he would. He would give his life without even a second of hesitation if it was the will of the Force. But this only fed more doubt into the boy that bore such an audible statement. Dazed, tased, and caught still amongst the horizon, worried that since his own answer was no, since he himself was afraid to say yes, that meant he remained a failure. Finally asking aloud that which bothered him since their morning session, his question was bold. "Master, could I really be a Jedi Knight?" were the words that left his lips. Because while he already had the Padawan title, more and more he felt unworthy. Dealing with this remorse, consulting it, and pushing it away, just as he had done for Femor, and later on, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Master Jin was the rock that his student could always rely on. and their bond would grow because of it. From here, our next change will occur several panels ahead, with the ship these 4 Jedi rode still being shot down upon entry to Telos 4. The moment when, as Xanatos finds himself laying on his side and helpless with his own lightsaber lost from his grip, only then would his master leap towards his defense, blocking and parrying several stray blaster bolts in a feat that could only be achieved by a veteran, promptly aided in kind by the appearance of Cryon and his own armed security. Winning this battle, much like they did in the original timeline, our difference here wouldn't just be the recovery of Xanatos, but also his position amongst the group, stealing a blaster off of one of the nearby corpses before shooting shots to defend his teacher. Because of this, when the conflict would finally end, father and student would meet on level ground, both standing tall and both eye to eye, still emotionally high from the previous sparring session and worried because of it. Such feelings would lead Xanatos to address his father not by parental title, but by name. Cryon, Lord and Governor of Telos 4, and the host of his latest mission, filling the recipient with distilled and distasteful rage upon hearing such detachment. Reluctantly gifting the boy he still considered his son with an escort and speeder to call his, the Lord himself would retreat to dwell on his own thoughts, remembering well what the Jedi did to their students, trained them to conquer their emotions. With Xanatos going on to discover the hidden cameras in the rooms given to them and disarming them, much like he did in George's timeline, the emotions he held in check nearly burst when his father confronted him for a second time. This would lead towards what would be in our timeline the first moment that Xanatos would openly call Cryon his father. But here, he does so out of spite, noticing well the backhanded manipulations that his father continuously danced around. From here, the journey of Master and Padawan towards the scene of High Priestess Leora's murder would now be laced with further suspense, with the student openly stating his struggle and admitting aloud that his feelings were getting to him. And the answer he received to such a statement wasn't the one he expected, but it was desperately the one he needed. Embraced and emboldened, told directly by Master Qui-Gon Jinn that emotions weren't always bad, going further to tell his student that he wasn't just a great Jedi, but an even greater person. His only problem was his pride, promptly switching the conversation to Orakan Tamric and how C2 needed to grow, a realization soon made apparent to both when, as a group, they used the Force to sense that which could have contributed to Leora's death. Gifted with the fleeting sight, none but Orakan could make out, and even then, she nearly fainted. Holding on to the assumption that this shadowy image is Daroki, and changing Xanatos to where his reaction was one of concern instead of mockery, Master Jin himself would suggest the involvement of another Jedi, yet not a Jedi, blind to the idea of a fallen Jedi at this point. This isn't to say that fallen Jedi didn't exist at this point in the lore, because Exar Kun was already a viable character. I think more or less the author was just hinting at the implication that no one really understood what Daioki was supposed to be. And even now, over basically 15 years later at this point, I argue we still don't know what he was supposed to be. Only in the next comic, Jedi The Dark Side 3, would our next change fully occur, where originally Xanatos would confront his master, worried that Orakan Tamarik would take his place and that this mission was his last assignment by Qui-Gon's side. With the next difference in our timeline being the admittance that this teacher would speak next, agreeing aloud that this mission was indeed their last together, their last mission as student and master, with only two options presented by the council, one to pass and the other to fail. Seeking to pass this trial, to become a Jedi Knight, to show his worth and value towards Qui-Gon for training him, Xanatos in our timeline would keep this conversation a secret, as requested by his master, going on to fight for his sister's life when threatened during an artificial riot at his father's palace. The lesson with Femor once again took center stage, leaping in front of his sister before blocking the shots intended for her. Needless to say, without the trauma of his sister dying in front of him, and without the implication of Master Tall withholding information, the departure of this master from the planet would come with much more patience than originally. Taking this change just a little bit further, not only would Xanatos be welcoming towards Orakan, he would even encourage her placement in the group, not afraid of losing his position to her like he was in George's timeline. And without Xanatos telling his father the suspicions that Master Jin held upon the Anatarian Rangers, no justification for war could be mustered, changing the entire latter half of the Dark Side 4 comic to the point where the next comic, Dark Side 5, is barely recognizable. In fact, instead of just some planetary-sized revolt against the openly corrupt governor, Lord Cryon, the battle would now be much smaller, starting first with the simplest of strolls inside the Telosian palace. Only then would Nation finally confront her brother and tell all, revealing that her father, their father, had sought to pivot and turn favor against their galactic neighbors. And while I will admit his position in the overall Republic is kind of odd, in my opinion. What I mean is, he's not a senator in the Republic, but he also isn't just some noble born into politics like Bail Organa. He's just someone who happens to be a heavily militarized governor of a planet once bombarded by Sith centuries ago. But I will admit, it's never stated that it's a democratic position. The backstory of Dairoki is also left completely in the dark, with only the statement by Qui-Gon that he trained on Coruscant for a few years. We, as the reader, are never told who his master was, why he himself is so deformed, why he left the Order to begin with, or why Master Toll and Qui-Gon both recognized him, holding on to the implication that he's a fallen Jedi. If he never even completed his training as a Padawan, I personally think he would still be using a training lightsaber to begin with, but this, of course, is left up to interpretation, because the idea of completing your Jedi training could hypothetically have different definitions, and he is never 100% stated to be a Padawan, only heavily implied. With all of this stated and told, and with everything understood and finally in order, only here and now would the denial of Xanatos finally make sense. The moment when, seconds after the revelation from his guilt-ridden sister, guards sought to shoot his master, triggering Qui-Gon's second Padawan to promptly ignite his own lightsaber. In such a defense, Cryon ran to retreat as even more guards swarmed the room, incapacitating several of these henchmen. The student pled for his master to remain back with his sister. Xanatos also proclaimed that he alone would follow and confront his father, finally accepting his final trial as a Jedi. And here, with no time to waste or delay, as blaster bolts rocketed past them, Master Jin agreed. Initially alone on this ascent to catch up, the aid of Orakan Tamric came when Xanatos needed her most, interrupting Cryon's escape. From here, the cause of Cryon's death wouldn't come from Qui-Gon, but Xanatos himself. Taken back to the very sparring session we discussed at the beginning of this video and how the worried student answered no, such a historic response was soon changed in an instant, placing his own body between his father and Orakan, asked to leave all of this violence aside, to restrain from politics and live peacefully by his son's side. The governor of Telos IV flew into a rage, swinging and slashing while spewing and spitting, cursing the boy he no longer called his. Forced to strike, parry, and shatter Cryon's blade just in time to prevent the innocent Jedi behind him from passing away, its impact also sent his father flying backwards towards the very same death he suffered in George's original timeline. And this would be the truest test for Xanatos, his true trial of flesh, and the moment when, in the eyes of the Jedi Order, he fully became a knight, no longer bound by the dark, freed from his past trepidation, and detached from his emotions.